She watched the monitors, heart pounding, as a team of medics rushed a young soldier into the trauma bay. His face split open, blood pooling on the table, life balancing on a scalpel's edge. The head trauma surgeon barked orders. The protocol was precise: stabilize, transport, get consent, follow chain of command, no exceptions. She stepped forward, voice steady but urgent. He's coding. You need to intubate now, no time for paperwork. The chief nurse froze. Protocol demanded consent or approval. The surgeon paused, time stalled. She didn't wait for permission. Her hands moved. Tube inserted. Breath returned. The machine beeped life back into the flat line. In that moment, she broke every rule they had. But they couldn't argue when the soldier's chest rose again. That was her danger and her salvation. Within minutes, she was pulled aside. The hospital staff stopped. The air thickened. Hospital security escorted her to a sterile conference room, where administrators watched with cold eyes. They read a letter: violation of emergency protocol, failure to follow procedure, disciplinary action begins immediately. They fired her before the soldier even opened his eyes. She left without protest. It was supposed to be routine. A nurse too bold, a procedure bent, a reprimand swift and silent. She smelled shadows, years of unspoken command in her blood, but in the hall outside, there was a phone call. So was a phone call. Unmarked line, midnight. One word whispered, they need her. She awoke the next morning to a knock on the door. She hadn't slept. Her mind spun through pain wards, trauma bays and long roads home. When she opened it, there stood 25 men, tall, broad, eyes sharp. Navy SEAL in casual civvies, They filed inside quietly, dignity in each step. At the end stood an older man with steel gray hair. He looked past her as if he'd been waiting years. He didn't speak immediately. He simply nodded, surveying the room, then looked directly at her. You didn't break protocol, he said. You saved protocol. Silence filled the room. No applause. Just unwavering eyes that recognized her story. She didn't know it yet, but those men had seen her save lives before, in ways no one else could. There'd been others, quiet medics, silent heroes. Her teammates who'd bridged the gap between dying and living without fanfare. Tonight, they came in respect. They came in solidarity. They came because sometimes rules exist for those who need time, not for those who act with conviction. She asked no questions. She paced as they filed in and out, preparing to depart. When the steel-gray man returned, he handed her a sealed envelope. Inside, a certificate, honoring her actions under fire. A note, on behalf of every medic you saved, thank you. Signed by commanding officers who shivered at her name. That was more than respect. It was a reckoning. Narrator tone shifts inward for empathy. Her backstory emerges. She had been a combat trauma nurse in the medical battalion, deployed in Helmand, Kandahar, Fallujah. She'd pulled 3 men from wreckage after wide tour through Humvees. She'd stitched torn skin that smelled of dust and gunpowder. She'd administered morphine in tents that rocked with mortar fire. The taste of antiseptic and fear clung to her uniform. She had lost more than blood. She had lost comrades to silence and bureaucracy. The one who taught her to act fast died because paperwork moved slower than rotors. She carried nightmares of port calls, gunmetal skies, the beep of dying monitors. When she came home, she tried to be quiet, to do. She tried to follow the rules. She tried to bury trauma in protocol. Now protocol nearly buried her. But the senior SEAL didn't call about protocol. He called because they needed her calm under chaos. She returned a look that said, I never left. He said, we need you again. No medals here. No crowds, just truth. She was a hero they relied on. Inside that bay later, she stood alone in clean scrub. She touched the spot on her forearm where a healing injection mark throbbed. That wound, once invisible, now pulsed with meaning. That afternoon, the hospital administration withdrew their disciplinary notice. They issued a statement. Due to extraordinary circumstances and heroic intervention, disciplinary actions are rescinded. The hospital recognizes exceptional judgment that saved a life. They didn't make it public. No headlines. No press release. Just a quiet reversal, as if admitting they'd been wrong. The SEAL, before they left, formed a silent line. Each placed a dog tag in her hands. Each looked her in the eye. They didn't say it, but each tag said, "You did not stand alone." She walked them to the door. They shook hands. They nodded. They nodded. They left. For the first time in months, she exhaled. A week later, at the local Veterans Cafe, she passed by familiar faces: Marines, medics, paramedics. They nodded. They didn't ask questions. She sat at her usual booth. A young woman from the VA service sat across. She placed a dog tag gently in front of her. "We heard," she said quietly. "We honor." That one sentence echoed in her chest stronger than applause. She raised her coffee, a quiet salute, and let the weight of unsung honor sink into her bones, because she had learned. Silent dignity does not require protocol. Sacrifice does not require permission. And unshakable honor is louder than any shouted apology. Security lights blinked in the dim hallway as she walked away from the trauma bay. The memory of her dismissal letter felt heavier than any surgical gown she'd ever worn. She'd saved a life, and in return, she lost a job. Yet each step held history, earned resilience, and something strangely peaceful: the knowledge that she did what she believed was right. Later that night, she found herself outside her small apartment, the air cool and quiet. She'd planned for a silent night, unpacking slowly, processing everything. Then came the knock. No uniform, no warning, just one tall man in civilian clothes, sunlighted by her porch lamp. Vice Admiral Ross Caldwell, the man who had quietly gathered the team of SEAL. He looked at her, watched her, for a long moment before speaking. "Protocol exists," he said softly, "for people who follow it." Her shoulders tightened, the weight of disbelief stirring inside. "But duty," he continued, "exists for those who can't wait." At that, he offered an envelope. She took it gently, turning it over in her hand. She opened it, and inside was a faded photo of the soldier she'd saved, lying on the trauma bed, surrounded by medics and wires. Next to it, a certificate from Field Medical Command, signed by the commanding general. Last line: "For judgment above protocol under fire." She didn't cry. She let her silence claim its weight. In the days that followed, word trickled through military support channels, not hospital PR, but networks of people trained to recognize silent sacrifice. Messages: "Thank you, we owe you. Meet us at 200 Blues Cafe, 2 o'clock, no signatures." At the cafe, she walked in to find 25 men and women, warriors and medics, some missing limbs, others carrying subtle scars. None marked, but all veterans of Fallujah, Ramadi, the corridors of trauma she knew too well. A young combat medic stepped forward. He held out a small, engraved case. Inside, her old name tag from the battalion she swore never to return to. And a card. "Welcome back, we need you." Flags hung quietly on the wall behind them. She scanned the faces, each stoic, respectful, part of an unwritten alliance forged in sacrifice. So, they shared no speeches, only nods. Applause in silence. She left the cafe with a thought heavy in her chest. She had never expected congratulations. She had only expected consequences. But respect, this kind of deep, unspoken respect, it carried more weight. At the hospital the next day, her email pinged. One message: "Your disciplinary record has been deleted." But the silence that once weighed against her began to shift into a different kind of quiet. The kind earned through reverence, not shame. Behind closed doors, administrators began citing the Evans case as a reference point during internal trainings. Her dismissal had become a cautionary tale. Not about disobedience, but about what happens when systems forget humanity. But she didn't gloat. She didn't rise to claim a microphone or brand herself as the symbol of reform. That wasn't her way. Instead, she kept showing up. On time in pressed scrubs. With the same calm in her eyes. Every patient mattered. Every second counted. Every breath was a battlefield she had long trained to win. And slowly, without asking, the world gave her something back. New interns watched her more closely. Not out of suspicion, but admiration. Veterans began requesting her by name. One evening a soldier whispered, as she placed a morphine drip into his arm, "You're the one who made them listen." She didn't answer. She just adjusted the flow and nodded gently, her eyes meeting his with quiet understanding. 6 months later, she stood in front of a podium. But not for politics, not for revenge. She had been invited to speak at a memorial for fallen medics. The room was packed, mostly with uniforms, some fresh, some faded. The kind of silence that filled the space wasn't grief alone. It was honor, thick and tangible in the air. She didn't prepare a speech, she spoke plainly. She talked about the one soldier she saved. Not as a hero, but as a nurse who couldn't watch a man die because a form hadn't been signed. "I was trained," she said slowly, "to hold a life in my hands like it matters more than my job security. That's not protocol, that's purpose." The crowd stood. No applause, just a slow rising respect. Outside, someone had placed 25 white roses in a vase near her car. No note, but she knew, she always knew. At home that night she pulled the drawer that held her badge, her old name tag, and the commendation plaque from Rear Admiral Hayes. She placed one more thing beside them, a single dog tag that had been anonymously mailed weeks earlier. It read only, "You chose right, Doc S." She never learned who that was, but she suspected. Years passed, seasons faded in and out of color, the hospital remodeled, policies changed. Policies changed. The trauma bay now carried a new poster near the code cart. It read, "When protocol meets a pulse, choose the pulse," and beneath it, without title or photo, 3 words stood in bold: "She saved him." No one had to ask who. Her story never aired on primetime. It didn't go viral. But it lived where it mattered. In the quiet conversations between nurses after shifts. In the silent gratitude of medics who've had to bend rules to save a life. In the invisible threads of a system slowly learning to value courage over conformity. She never asked for justice. But justice found her anyway. In 25 pairs of boots outside her door. In one whisper from a soldier on a stretcher. And in the stillness of knowing that, when it mattered, she didn't flinch. Some say silence is weakness. But they've never heard silence that speaks louder than blame. That carries weight heavier than guilt. That stands taller than accusation. Some silences carry judgment. Others carry honor. And hers, it carried an entire room into stillness and left it there in awe. If this story moved you, pause for a moment. Think of the unseen heroes around you. The ones who choose right over easy. The ones who don't shout for attention, but whisper through action. Tell us where you're watching from. Share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe for more stories that remind us, the quietest people often carry the loudest truths. And sometimes, when no one else is looking, a warrior answers the call in scrub.